This week, we're going to get deep. We're going to talk about why I feel grief is my superpower. And I'm also going to include a little trigger warning and an emotional warning that this probably might get a little bit deep in the feels if you're sensitive like me. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Fasting Focused Lifestyle Podcast, where each week I will be discussing all things fasting and how it can become the most valuable tool in your personal toolkit so that you can live a long, healthy, and meaningful life. I'm your host, Vicki Sharon, and thank you for joining me.
Hello, Saver. Whether you're saving for that trip to the tropics or saving for an emergency, now is the time to take advantage of Wells Fargo's savings options. Wells Fargo offers savings accounts that can help you save towards your goals. So, what are you saving for? Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/save to open a savings account today.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
Yes, I am owning that grief is my superpower, especially in my fasting lifestyle. And I'm recording this before I get started. I'm recording this now on the 8th of November, which initially, back in 2015, was our wedding anniversary. And 4 years later, turned into the day that I was told by a nurse from palliative care that my husband was dying. So, as we all know, every single one of us will absolutely experience grief at some level, at some point in their life. And grief is hard. Grief is extremely complicated. Grief is something that in Western culture, especially in the United States, is handled, talked about in a completely different way than many other parts in the world. And yeah, it is absolutely a drastic and sudden life-altering change to every single person it affects. So, to get a little bit of backstory, in case you don't remember, on myself, my personal grief history started, I feel, with my mom when she passed away when I was 16 years old. And for those that don't know, my mom got breast implants in January of 2000. And in that September, she developed an illness really quickly out of nowhere, which turned into her going into intensive care, going in to see her, and honestly not even recognizing that she even looked at all similar to how she was supposed to look. Seeing and experiencing my mom pass away at the age of 16 was extremely challenging. And I've always felt that my mom was someone that I could always come to when things were hard, tough, when we wanted to celebrate happy times. And honestly, there were times I just wanted to be next to and around my mom. But after my mom's death, my grandparents, her parents, actively grieved her death for 17 and 18 years on a very consistent daily basis. And I know this firsthand because when I lived with my grandparents, when I moved to Florida in 2007, I saw it firsthand. I saw the way that they let themselves be devoured by the sadness and the perpetuating grief and that heavy mindset and staying in that funk of missing my mom every single day. They would have little shrines set up around the house for little mementos and keepsakes, and they would allow themselves to physically stay sedentary, to allow their self-deprecating behaviors. And I always used to say they used to have a woe is me sort of attitude about pretty much everything in their life. And while they did have support groups here and there, and they did have friendship groups, and they were involved in their church, I feel the support groups that they had was an outlet for them to commiserate with each other more than to find solutions to help improve and benefit their lives. Their active grieving for 17 and 18 years, I personally feel, was a major contributor to their declining health, with their lifestyle, with the way they ate, with their mindset. And I just had a deep feeling that their lives could be so much better than they were. And I had tried many times, among my many yo-yo dieting kind of attempts throughout my time spent living in their house. I tried to help them to better their health and well-being. And as I've said, their mindset was absolutely not addressed. They allowed themselves to stay in that misery headspace. They thrived on commiserating with each other. They wanted me to commiserate with them, and I hated it. I hated it so much. And I remember having many conversations with them about how my mom, their daughter, would be absolutely pissed to hear and to know the way that they were dealing still with her death, instead of using her death and loss as a reason to keep living and to keep going, sharing her memory and legacy. So when my grandfather, my papa, as I call him, I didn't call him my grandfather, my papa, when he got sick, and he was sick a lot, he was in and out of the hospital a lot from what I remember being in that house. I believe it was a diagnosis of pneumonia, and within the month of August, I know there was a lot of in and out of the hospital, doctor's visits, lots of falls, lots of infections with his skin. He had uncontrolled diabetes, blood pressure, cholesterol, all that issues, still eating pretty much whatever he wanted, sitting predominantly for the most part of the day. Both my grandparents had their recliner chairs that they loved to sit in, positioned right in front of the TV, right near their living room. Their recliners were right near the kitchen, and really the only physical activity that they had during the day was to the kitchen to make something to eat, to go to the bathroom, or to go out to get something to eat. And it usually tied with going to a doctor's appointment or going to pick up more prescriptions. So as my papa's health got worse and the hospital stays got longer, the point where we were told that he would not bounce back from this pneumonia, that he was going to be needing to be transferred to hospice, I saw a little bit of a shift and change in my Nana, and I close my eyes and I think about now, she knew that she was facing what I've already experienced. She was facing being thrown unwantingly, unwillingly into widowhood and not feeling ready for it at all. But her mindset and codependency relationship with my papa, my Nana immediately started to let herself go as my papa was dying. We had lots of friends and family around us as we were in hospice for my papa, and seeing the way that my Nana was responding was really hard. And all those behavioral habits that she had with my papa in staying in the sadness, and that painful mindset continued to bubble up and take over more and more each day after he passed away. And as family and friends kind of dissipated, as they do after a funeral and service and all that stuff, I was the only family member that she had close by. And as a granddaughter, the experience that I had with my Nana as she was fresh in widowhood was absolutely shattering to me. While at first it seemed like she had good intentions about a lot of things, she was asking for help in different respects around her house, and I came over a lot to straighten things out. And, like many older folks who have kids, grandkids, there's usually lots of things to clean up, put away, and work through, paperwork and all that stuff. She started to emotionally detach from things and really let herself go into like a downward spiral really quickly. And between my Nana and Papa, my Nana, I had always felt my Nana was the one who wore the pants in the relationship, if that makes sense. She was always the one in charge of the finances and the ongoings of their dynamic, and always knew what was going on, had real good control over their day-to-day life, operations, schedule, nuances, everything. But after my Papa's death, it was like she didn't care anymore. And that decline and willingness to just stay in that sticky, dark headspace was so hard to be around. And it progressively got worse the more time I spent with her. And with that codependency kind of relationship that my Nana and Papa had, she needed someone to constantly stay with her. She wanted to have somebody stay with her so she could, I understand, to be able to want to cry and vent to someone, but there was no forward motion. It was I'm going to spin in my mental wheel sort of thing and just stay stuck where I'm at. But I want someone with me. Misery loves company, right? And she wanted it. She wanted someone to stay with her in her misery. And that's what my Papa had done to stay in the misery together, the two of them, grieving my mother's death. And now that my Papa had passed, she didn't have anybody to sit with her in misery anymore. And as a side, seeing and experiencing how my dad processed being a widower after my mom passed. Granted, they were separated and my dad has since remarried my awesome stepmom, but seeing and knowing how my dad handled that death and loss, and now freshly experiencing firsthand the way that my Nana was handling the passing of her husband, my Papa, just felt so unnecessarily hard. It felt like this was not the best choice. And throughout her decline, throughout the many times that I would spend time with her, accompanying her to doctor's office visits and visiting with her where she was staying, because eventually she did have to go to an assisted living facility because of the increased limitations in her mobility as part of her already poor sedentary lifestyle. And I feel like the effect that widowhood had on her only made things worse. She had physical therapy and refused to participate. She was given meals at the facility and refused to eat them, and she wanted snack food. She wanted me to pick up a McDonald's shake for her after she left a doctor's office visit that didn't go so well. And I distinctly remember sitting outside the doctor's office, waiting for the transport van to pick her up, to take her back to where she was staying at the facility, while she was sitting in her wheelchair. And she was just crying about how sad she was. And of course, I was there lovingly supporting her. But at the same time, it was like I had had enough. And I sort of unloaded in a way that may have slightly been taken harsh, but I would interpret it as tough love when I explained to her the way that she was dealing with and processing this grief of Papa passing away was absolutely not showing love, honor, compassion, honoring their memory, living to make them proud. This willingness that she was doing, I was telling her, this willingness to just give up, let go, and to succumb to the illnesses that are surfacing in her body, and to keep allowing the mindset, behaviors, lack of physical activity further contribute to the way that she was in a very hard, messy downward spiral was not what Papa and my mom would want for her. And she knew that, and she didn't like the way that I said it. She didn't like that I refused to go and get her a McDonald's shake. She sat there. I felt like I was talking to one of my kids as a toddler, and she just cried and wailed about how she wanted a strawberry shake and how she just wanted to have that to deal with the doctor's visit and her feelings and her sadness. And I remember going to my husband and telling him all this, and him just reminding me, you can't change her. She has to be the one to want this for herself. And she didn't. And that hurt really, really bad. As her health declined even further, and as I've mentioned in previous episodes, the big turning point, the most painful experience in visiting my Nana was visiting her on Mother's Day, as I've talked about before, coming into what I had hoped would be a loving, supportive sort of visit with my kids, her great grandkids now, giving her a little pot of flowers, wishing her a happy Mother's Day. And for the first spoken words to come out of her mouth, they weren't I love you, they weren't thank you. She didn't even say happy Mother's Day. The first spoken words she said when she saw us come in the room, her first spoken words when we came in the room, after the kids had stepped away from earshot, she said, I want to die. And I lost it. I remember unloading emotionally in the hallway. I remember going up to nurses in the hallway and not feeling like there were any other options to save my Nana, and that she had given up entirely on life. And again, just like my husband had said, she wanted this. She wanted to go and be with my papa. She wanted to go and be with my mom. She didn't want to try anymore. She didn't want to be here without them. I wanted better for her, but she didn't want it for herself. How many people in your life do you know that would echo that same sentiment? Because I pretty much would feel that there's a lot more out there than would honestly want to admit. Her death only came a couple weeks after her saying that to me. And after she passed away, not just her death, but the effect that it had on me and previous things that she had said as she was going through the active dying process, I know were slightly fueled by dementia, but there were some parts of our conversations where I was made to feel like this would also be my fate. And I got so angry. And I remember distancing myself quite a bit from wanting to spend time with her as she got closer to death, because I didn't agree with it. And I didn't want to allow myself to get stuck in that headspace, because to me that meant death. So my Nana died on June 1st, 2018. And after her death, I went into a very, very messy emotional eating spiral. I let myself be absolutely consumed by that emotional eating monster. And it was like a giant mental behavioral tanglement of weeds and thoughts and feelings that stayed with me every single second of the day. I even had the thought of they're haunting me, haunting me and staying in this headspace. And I wanted to fight it so bad, but I didn't know how to, because I didn't know any other option. I didn't know any other way. And as I've spoken about previously with my weight loss methods that I've tried before, when I had gotten to my tipping point of waking up one morning and seeing the way that I looked, feeling the way that I felt, having to literally pull myself up from laying down, and how much that hurt, and how limited my ability to move around was, and how much that affected my headspace, and how that only contributed to the fact that I wanted to eat more to make these thoughts and feelings go away, and how that contributed to, well, you're just staying in your grief. Well, just go grab this. You can pacify those feelings for another moment, another hour, and go hide away. And, oh, you just bought this. Go eat that. That day when I woke up on August 9th, 2018, looking at myself in the mirror, I literally felt as if I was going to be facing that same fate. I literally felt I was facing that same fate if I didn't take immediate and drastic action. So I got started doing what I thought I had to do. And at the time, I thought that was keto. And as I've spoken about before, it was a mild form of torture for myself. I had to overly restrict what I was eating and stick to this food list and watch my portions and look for the drink powders and the food special products and things. And it felt so inauthentic and so much like a shortcut, and that I wasn't fully in it. I wasn't fully committed. And deep down, even though I was thinking that that was going to be my way, I didn't feel fully confident in it. So then, of course, like many of us do, we go down the YouTube rabbit hole. And as I've spoken about before, this one video that I watched about this 30-day water fast, the results that he had and the way that he felt was enough for me. It truly convinced me to at least try to integrate a form of fasting. And all the other follow-up YouTube videos that I watched after that reaffirmed that this was something that I needed to try. And maybe, now that I'm reflecting and thinking about it, maybe I was being guided to check this out and try this. Who knows? We'll never know. So I got on that fasting train, and I've never gotten off. And I had been extremely successful, just plugging along, doing my own thing. I had just been plugging along, being extremely successful, learning and loving throughout the journey until April 2019, the following year. And I was actually at the hair salon getting a trim. And before we even started, I got a phone call from my husband. He was in full-blown tears and hysterics. And this man has never really been as emotional as I am. And it takes a lot to make him cry. And he was absolutely hysterical. So I remember going out to my car and speaking to him further on the telephone, and him explaining that the follow-up that he went to at his doctor's office, what he thought for his diabetic checkup that we were managing with diet and movement and all this stuff, checking his blood sugars and trying to figure out why this persistent cough he had been having since the previous September just wouldn't go away. It was because his enlarged heart. His doctor had told him, because of the x-ray they did, his heart was doubled in size and he needed to go to the emergency room right away. And he got so freaked out and terrified. And I remember going immediately to meet up with him and to further find out information. And the hospital and everybody, all the specialists and the cardiologists that we met to try to problem solve with his medical history to where this originated from. And later, sitting with him at the cardiologist's office that had seen him in the hospital, be absolutely confused at where this started from and how this manifested in his body was just a complete puzzle to him. He didn't understand. We were trying to figure it out. And the doctor had mentioned to Jim and us both that he needed to have a heart transplant. The moment the cardiologist mentioned that Jim would need a heart transplant, I could see the entire color on my husband's face disappear, and I saw him go absolutely white in fear. And it was as if I saw in my mind a giant hourglass be flipped over and starting to slowly trickle through those little grains of sand was, to me, the amount of time that he had left alive. And throughout that diagnosis, throughout his health condition, the both of us very eagerly, very, very eagerly and determined, we were both so eager and determined to explore and find any option, any outlet, any medication needed to improve his situation, to make things better for his health. The doctor had immediately said that Jim was no longer able to work and would have to file for Social Security disability. And by getting on Social Security disability, it would allow him, as a small business owner, not insured, because as small business owners, it's hard for us to get our own medical insurance. By getting Social Security disability, it would allow him to get on the transplant list. And that's what we needed to do. We needed to do that. And immediately getting that diagnosis of needing the heart transplant, we started the process of getting assistance in getting the approval for Social Security disability. And no matter how hard we tried, no matter how many phone calls his cardiologist made to physicians for across the entire state, colleagues that he knew personally, he even explained to us as we were sitting in his office how frustrated he was. The specialist, the cardiologist, was saying how disappointed he was with the specialists, his colleagues, his friends across the entire state, that nobody wanted to help him with his extremely urgent need because he didn't have insurance, because he didn't yet have that approval for Social Security disability, because it came down to money and insurance approval. We had been continuing to fight from April all through this summer to do every single thing we could to keep him alive, to keep him stable. And he only declined further and further. And he wanted to fight it. He wanted to fight this so hard. He had such a fierce will to stay alive. And no matter his mind, his body couldn't keep up with it. So he was in and out of the hospital a lot. And I felt each time it got worse. Because as you probably know, the way that being in a hospital for a week at a time, multiple times throughout a summer, can absolutely affect a compromised immune system. And that's what he was experiencing. We wanted to explore and utilize every single option, avenue, connection that we could. We were fighting. I was fighting. He was fighting. We wanted to keep him alive. But it all came down to an approval for Social Security disability. And throughout all this, throughout his health decline, just through my fierce, determined mindset, despite his health prognosis, I knew I had to keep mine as strong and healthy as possible. And to me, that was staying the course with fasting and to avoid that emotional eating monster with my fasting armor as often and as much as I could. And then that fall in November, he was in the hospital for the last time. 4 years ago today, he was in the cardiac unit of our local hospital. More tests, more doctor's visits, and I came to see him as I did every single day that he was in the hospital. And for some reason, he was under the assumption that he would be able to soon go home while we continued to wait for the approval from Social Security disability and continue care while we waited at cardiac rehabilitation therapy appointments, which was fine because I remember helping to bring my papa to those. Only a couple hours later, after coming in to visit him, and first thing I said to him when I saw him, "You know what day today is? Happy anniversary. I love you." Sat with him for a few hours. Family came in, friends came in to visit, to wish him well, to check on, see how he's doing, how much longer he would be in the hospital, see if they could help him with anything. And then a nurse that I had not yet seen before came in, and she asked if I was his wife. And I said, "Yep, that's me." And she said, "Hi, I'm from palliative care. I need to speak to you for a moment. Give me just a couple seconds and I'll be right back." And I had my phone in my hand, and I distinctly remember, and she truly was only gone a couple seconds. She stepped away, and in those few seconds, I searched on my phone, what is palliative care? First thing I saw was end-of-life hospice care for serious illnesses, diseases, for terminal end-of-life care. And I could feel every bit of emotion from my toes bubble up into this giant knot of emotion in my gut. And it was only seconds. She was only out of the room for seconds, and I walked outside with her. And I immediately started to brace myself on that handrail that's in almost all hospitals at hip waist level as she was talking to me. And she said, "Mrs. Sharon, I don't know how else to say this to you besides being straightforward. Your husband is dying. He is actively dying. He will be needing to be transferred to hospice." And as soon as she said that, as soon as she started to say that, I could feel my entire body just let go, and I lost it on the floor. And just moments, it probably was, again, just seconds, and staff immediately felt like coming out of nowhere from all around me were literally scooping me up off of the floor as I was just in my own emotions beside myself. And they escorted me off to the nearby room that didn't have a patient in there. And they started explaining everything about how the next few days would go and what the next steps were. But in those moments of finding out that the grains of sand in that hourglass were gone, they were empty, or he was on really his last few little grains of sand in that hourglass, letting myself go was absolutely not an option. I needed to be as present and attentive to these hard emotions. And as I say all of this, I see, I feel, and I smell and experience all these feelings as if they were just happening fresh, raw, because of how I just allowed myself to stay in this fasted state instead of listening to that little emotional monster that I had quieted through my weight loss with fasting. That emotional eating monster was ready, willing, eager to bubble on up, take over, and be like, "All right, we're here again. Let's eat those feelings." This time was different. This time, I refused to give in to that eating monster. I refused to go backwards, because amidst that decline into hospice and his transfer into hospice, he and I had a conversation, a very hard conversation, to where he made me promise that I would not let myself go the way that my Nana let herself go when my papa died. That our kids did not deserve this. And that he insisted that I promise him that I would not go backwards. And I'm very proud to have kept up that promise. That promise keeps a very fierce, strong fire in every single cell of my body. Easily, that's a reason to give in, to give up, to let go. But that's my reason why. That's my reason to keep going. Because we had that fierce fire between us to keep him alive. And our kids did not need to lose both their parents. Despite his physical circumstances, we both had tirelessly explored every single option. And for it to be limited by a piece of paper, by an authorization, apology for swear warning, but that fucking sucks. And throughout his decline, in hospice, I chose to deliberately stay in an extended fast state because I knew even one bite of food, I knew that was opening the floodgates for the emotional eating monster to take over, to take the reins. And that was not an option. That was absolutely not an option for me. So I continued to fast. I allowed myself to stay in a fasted state throughout his passing, through his death, through the ceremony and memorial service that we had. Despite everyone insisting that I eat, insisting and shoving food towards me, Vicky, please eat, Vicky, please eat. I did eat. I did break my fast with vegetables. I did eat. But I knew with every fiber and cell in my body that I needed to finish. I needed to experience the entire duration of the initial diagnosis of him needing to go into hospice, through his passing, his death entirely. I needed to experience everything from the time the nurse told me that he was dying, throughout his time in hospice, to the day that he died, as well as his memorial service. I needed to be as present emotionally, mentally, physically as possible. And for me, my strength only grew to be able to stay in my best self with utilizing fasting. To me, that felt like that was honoring his memory, our legacy, our family's future. And to me, that meant more than having a bite to eat. When physically I knew I still had plenty of body weight to utilize. That was not the issue. My emotions were at the verge of an emotional tailspin. And fasting just kept everything in control for me. So what I learned through these losses, these are my reasons why. I have realized that the excuses that we pile up, that we list as burdens in our life to keep us stuck where we're at, those should be the reasons why. Every hard, messy, difficult circumstance in your life should be the reason why you try and stick with this method to better and improve your health. I've always said that we have to be our best and most supportive health advocate. We have to. Because like I said with my husband's situation, it all came down to an approval for Social Security disability, which, side note, that approval letter came 2 weeks after he passed away. And it was backdated to start on October 1st. And he passed away on the 10th. And no phone call was made. None. A phone call could have saved his life. So as much as we put our trust and expectations into the medical system, we have to be our own biggest health advocates. We have to care so much. We have to care tremendously. Because as I've talked about before too, the Icarian proverb that I heard when I went to Greece last summer, that I'm calling her my Aunt Thea, she's my unofficial Greek aunt, she said that they say when someone passes away, we must stay well so that we can remember the ones that we've lost. Think about that for a second. Are you staying well so that you can remember the ones that you've lost? Hearing that proverb lit me up just to an infinite level that I never even thought was possible before. I had been living it before I even heard this proverb, and that brought massive tears to my eyes, and I just ran and gave her a hug. And that's why she's my aunt. And lastly, because I personally feel though, even though the ones that we lose along our lifetime, their bodies may not be physically here, but if you look for signs, I promise you, they are always still around you. And I know that for certain. I feel it every single day. I know He's around me. And I know that there is immense pride, love. I know He's proud of me. I know I'm getting that love reciprocated back. I know this is what I'm meant to do. And in that, I have my superpower. That is my superpower. I'm going to give you a great big virtual hug. Hope that wasn't too many tissues for you. I only used one. But if you are in need of supportive coaching on your fasting journey, I'm here. I would love to support you on your journey to show you how truly transformative this can be in your life, mind, and body. TheFastingFocusLifestyle.com has my website and more. And if you like this episode, maybe consider leaving a review. I would love to hear about it. If you have ideas for future podcast topics, please email me at Vicki, VICKI, at thefastingfocusedlifestyle.com. And because I need it, I'm going to give you another virtual hug over the podcast mic here. Thank you for hanging out with me. I greatly appreciate you, and I hope you are also your own biggest health advocate. Please stay well, please take care of yourself, and I'm here and ready if you need my help. I believe in you, even if you don't. Take care of yourself, and we'll talk next time. Thanks. The Fasting Focused Lifestyle Podcast. Copyright 2023. The information given within this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please consult your doctor before starting any weight loss method. Thank you.
Fargo, the new virtual assistant from Wells Fargo, makes banking faster and easier. Like this.
Fargo, what's my checking account routing number?
And this.
Fargo, turn off my debit card.
And this.
Fargo, what did I spend on groceries last month?
And that's just the beginning. Do you, Fargo? You can. In the Wells Fargo mobile app. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/getfargo.
Terms and conditions apply. Your mobile carrier's availability and message and data rates may apply. Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.